Hello, welcome to the first installment of Toy Storage Nation series, TSN Conversations. This series is based on questions we most often get at Toy Storage Nation. Today's topic is considering RV and boat storage, where to start. Today's participants are Beth White, President of Developer Services Incorporated, Greg Ellsworth, President of Self Storage Consulting Group, and Chris Koenig, Manager of Kingsland's Co. I also want to mention that all three are Toy Storage Nation Advisory Board members, and Chris Koenig is the current president of the advisory board. Thank you all for being here. We're very fortunate to have experts with your amount of knowledge and experience in RV and boat storage industry with us today. Before we begin, I was hoping you could all give us just a brief background about yourselves. So Beth, I'd like to start with you.
Good morning. Yes, my company, Development Services, has been in business for 24 years doing feasibility studies for self-storage and RV and boat storage. We've been able to do some of the larger RV and boat storages in the nation, as well as the small mom and pops. And we specialize in very due diligence work. Most clients don't realize how important it is to look at all the feasibility aspects. So we bring that to the table for your clients.
Awesome, Beth. And Chris, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris Koenig with Kingsland Companies, and self-storage developer, owner, manager, and got into the Class A covered RV boat storage development about 5 years ago or so. So currently owning, managing 2 projects right now and have 3 other projects under development in Northern California for the Class A RV boat storage.
Awesome, thank you. And Greg.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Ellsworth with Self Storage Consulting Group. We're a feasibility study, architectural firm, general contracting, third-party management development firm, working both in traditional self-storage as well as Class A boat and RV. And we work across the nation, and we really use the data to drive our development decisions, both to make cost-effective decisions, but also what the market needs, which will truncate your lease-up time and everything else. So very data-driven, and appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you again all for being here. I do want to mention to whoever's watching that we will make sure to get all of your contact information at the end of this video, so everyone knows how to reach out to you. Also, if you're viewing this from the Toy Storage Nation website, we'll have bios on the page as well that they can take a look at. So let's go ahead and get started into the meat and potatoes of today. Given our topic is considering RV and boat storage, and I do say it with a question mark, where to start? I get that question quite often from folks who they're sold on the industry. Some of them even come from the development side, but they haven't done RV and boat storage, and now it's a different market to work with. So the first question I'm going to pose to all three of you is this. If someone's considering RV and boat storage, what are the first steps that you recommend that they take? And I have kind of 2 scenarios. One is they already have the land. You know, they have the land, they're considering RV and boat storage for it. Sometimes they've done a land grab, sometimes it's family land or whatnot. And the other is if they don't have land yet, where to begin. So I'm going to ask Greg to please start.
So in these 2 scenarios, let's take first if you own the land already. The very first thing to start with is understanding what the market needs. Is it covered RV? Is it enclosed RV? And really building out your unit mix to understand what your potential revenue basis is in that property. Getting a architectural firm involved early, as they are the best ones to draw the site plan instead of a civil engineer. And understanding your cash flow. After all, we're not in this for occupancy, we're in it for revenue. As far as those that do not have land, what I recommend is starting with a market that has the rental rates that meet your expectations and your investment goals. So a lot of times the price per square foot or the price per acre on land, to me, is secondary to what the market is generating as far as rental rates. And I'll chase those rental rates across the country as long as they are able to be developed in those markets, right? Some cities are very hard to deal with, entitlements are difficult, but if the rental rates are there, the headache really justifies the return on investment.
Greg, where do you suggest if someone is considering this and totally get it and so smart to be looking at the rental rates to justify, but where do you recommend that they start looking at where the rental rates are, whether it be their area or if they're open to developing nationwide, where is some of that information that they can find?
So the best place to get that from is either your feasibility study provider or calling and doing a rent survey in the markets that you're interested in. Obviously, you're going to start in areas that are most familiar to you, either areas where you have other assets or where you live or where you vacation. And calling around, getting a feel for what that market is charging will get you started off on the right step. A lot of people get down this road. They put the land under contract and realize everybody is full, but they're charging too little to justify the development costs as they relate to that property, whether it be entitlements, whether it be offsite improvements, or whether it be just construction at that time. But visiting properties, calling competitors, understanding what the market is generating is going to help you direct your efforts in an area that's going to give you the best return.
Makes sense. Thank you. Jo Beth, piggybacking on what Greg covered, do you kind of recommend the same scenario or give it coming from a feasibility background? And we'll cover a little bit more about what you do in a moment, but any recommendations that you give with regards to they don't have the land yet or they do have the land?
Well, in either scenario, I would agree with Greg. Your rates have got to support construction cost and give you enough income to pay your expenses and have a profit. A lot of people do get into the business and they think it's just awesome, but the rates are so tiny and their money's gone hard and then they get frustrated with it. So I would agree that you always want to make sure your rates are commensurate to pay for all of your cost. If you own the dirt, you're kind of limited to what that dirt can do as far as rental rates and the market unit mixes. The unit mixes can go from the boat users to the RV users. You have a lot of markets that are more boat related, so you're going to have a lot of the smaller units, not as many of the big diesel pushers. So that's important to recognize in your market. If you don't have your dirt, we actually have a feasibility study called a reverse feasibility study that we can find those underserved markets for you that pass the test of economic, that their rates are high enough, there's room in the market, the pipeline's not full, and then you go land hunting. So, but the rates are probably predominantly more important than any other aspect is rates.
Thank you, Jo Beth. And Chris?
Yeah, I would
anything
agree
else
with,
to add?
yeah, I would triple down on what Jo Beth and Greg said of figuring out rents. I mean, for me, when I first start, I go online and figure out what rental rates there are in the market. Unfortunately, I would say 90% of the time, most RV boat storage facilities either don't have a website or really have any information online. We're very fortunate at Greg's and self-storage too. We can go to almost any market and there's at least a Public Storage, Extra Space, or one of the big guys that have a website, and we can pull those rates within minutes. It does take a decent amount of either going in person or calling those facilities to get those rates. So it's a little bit more work to dig that up, but that is your starting point. And then to me, then you hire someone, you kind of work backwards to figure out what the land's worth after, what the revenue is, work to figure out that land residual, whether it's on your property or property you're looking at buying. But then before I would spend any significant amount of money, I would pull someone like Jo Beth in to do a real study that I'm likely going to need for a bank, and I'm definitely going to need for, investors or just for my own good night's sleeping when I'm looking at a multi-million-dollar project.
Sure. Thank you, Chris.
The only thing I would add to that, which I think is tough, is to determine if we're talking about that Class A product, is there's just not a lot of Class A comparable products to price match. So that's what I think Jo Beth helps with a lot too, and Greg, I hope think you would agree with me, is you're looking at kind of Class B, C product and taking that leap to, this is what I think a Class A rent would be, which is the unique opportunity for this in all of these markets across the country too.
Thank you. And I want to kind of give a definition for Toy Storage Nation, what we say a Class A facility is, and why we think it is so important. Is a Class A facility is one, it's 4 simple things, and it's really our pill in their ground. It needs to be covered in some manner, whether that's canopy or enclosed. It needs to be gated, it needs to be fenced, and it needs to be paved in some way. Those are the kind of the simple definition. And then on top of that, being a Class A, obviously all the ancillary revenue stream that come. These are folks that have the money to pay the higher rents, and they're happy to do that if they know that their expensive toys are going to be protected and secured, and that that they have those conveniences. So, and another reason that we're really advocating for Class A in particular is that, we'll talk about this in future installments, but right now you might be able to get away with having a parking lot, but competition within this market is coming. There's still so much opportunity in this market, and again, we'll talk more about that. But as the competition comes in, if you don't have those things that are going to give the security and the protection and the amenities, the folks that are at your site will go to a Class A. So you want to do it from the get-go. Would you all agree?
Absolutely.
For the most part, there might be,
Yeah.
So I want to kind of get back to the topic at hand, and we did talk a lot about looking at the rental rates. I want to also now just look at the broader topic of site selection. We obviously want to find an area where the numbers are going to pan out, but is there anything that you could give as far as when someone is needing to look for a piece of land? What size do you recommend? Are there any pockets of the country that you're seeing that there's more opportunity than others, and given that it needs to be along the way or near recreation, but anything that you might recommend to folks when they are looking for a location as far as the piece of land? And let's see, I'm going to start with Chris this time.
I laugh because I've heard Beth talk about this several times at our shows, and what I found is either near my house or near where I recreate. And those are really kind of the prime locations. Now, with that said, and it was kind of when we were at the show in Vegas and went and looked at the Love's truck stop there, that was 30 minutes out of town. It was adjacent right off the highway. So, that's not necessarily near where I live, and it's maybe on the route of where I'm going to recreate. So I think to add to those 2 locations is just ease in access off of a major highway. I know I'm definitely tracking the Love's truck stops, and their business model is adding the covered, I would say, Class A RV boat storages to their truck stops, which to me has a lot of synergy. And they're locating those immediately right off of major highways, which I think, the more I think about it, is that's kind of that prime spot. I used to think, if you build it, they will come, and you could be way off the beaten path. And I do think that there's maybe a case for that, but a real estate 101 says location, location, location. So I would have to say that a good, easily accessible location off a major highway in an area that would be on a path to recreation.
Would you agree, maybe, Chris, that a benefit to boat and RV storage is that it doesn't have to be within city limits? You're not
absolutely.
having to deal with sometimes with the tougher entitlement issues and whatnot. We'll talk about that in a moment, because it can always be something with regards to that, but it doesn't have to be right in the middle of a city.
And the problem is and I think we'll get to it too, is it requires a large amount of land, and so to get that much acreage on Main and Main is going to be too expensive. This wouldn't be the highest and best use for this type of product.
So what would you recommend as far as the size of the land? How many acres would you say is the least you want to be looking at? And again, we know every project's different.
Yeah, I would say 5 would be probably the minimum, and that would have to be in a higher rent area. I'm kind of, my smallest one right now is about 7, and my largest one right now is 15 acres.
Thank you.
So it's a big range, but
And on some of your larger properties, are you seeing like a phasing in plan where it's not all done at once, but they're doing, phasing it in over time?
I am not, although I like that model. Like, take my 15-acre project, that's going to be 800 units. I think that is very large. If I was just building a conventional just carport, I would probably phase it. I 100% would phase it. And I don't know if that phasing would be pave the whole site and then only do half of the canopies to save some cost. I don't know. I'm not necessarily sold on paving in 2 phases. I think that might be a little funky. I'm not phasing them because I'm doing solar on all of my projects. So it actually behooves me to do the solar, complete that, and then that triggers a bunch of other financial benefits that offset the added cost for that. But I think I would definitely look into phasing a larger project for sure.
Thank you. Joe, Beth, do you have anything to add with regards to the size of the land? What do you typically say? And again, I mean, you're the numbers lady.
Well,
And I know
basically,
it all starts with the dirt.
when you look at the dirt, it all again ties into the rental rates. We've done reverse studies that we found rates from 60 cents for a 12 by 40 per foot, all the way up to $1.17. Well, if you're at the $1.17 end, you could build a tinier project that's very, very viable. So it's rent driven. But the minimum size, I would agree, Chris and I have talked about this for years, would be 5 acres would be minimum. That'll get you about 210 to 220 stalls at an angle with tandem stalls. So, 5 acres is probably, you have the 2 different types of facilities. You have the deep urban facility, which is I want to have it close to home where I live because I take it in every direction to go play. Or you have the guy that wants to have it close to Yellowstone because that's where they always play. So you have the 2 different types of facilities.
Okay. And Greg, anything, thank you, Joe Beth, anything to add as far as, the dirt, the land?
Yeah, no, and I echo that, right? 5 acres to me is the minimum. There's a difference between traditional storage. If you're converting from traditional storage over to RV and boat now and developing that, your lot coverage on a traditional storage site might be 70% of your square footage is usable. In a boat and RV storage facility, because of the driveways, you're going to get somewhere around 50%. So half of your land is used for drive aisles, setbacks, easements, retainage, things of that nature. But to echo what Chris was talking about with the Love's gas station just north of Las Vegas, the logical search criteria for individuals when looking for boat and RV is when they start their trip or when they end their trip. They're not really looking on their phones while they're driving for storage on the way to the location. So if you are building on the path to recreate, it's extremely important that you have that drive-by traffic, right? And Chris mentioned it as well. Location, location, location. You're not going to get the inquiries if you're not visible from the main thoroughfare driveway. And so that's extremely important. And then just to touch one more time on what Chris had talked about with phasing, the nice thing about boat and RV storage and why TSN pushes a Class A product is that when you phase a boat and RV storage facility, it's extremely logical and you actually aren't changing the means and methods of development. When you develop a canopy RV spot, you pave everything first and then go back and saw cut your footers for the posts. So if you were to pave the entire 5 acres, you're not undoing something if you were to phase it. You're not paying for things twice. So it actually lends itself to spread your capital out over multiple phases as the revenue comes in and as you're able to establish the value that justifies your rental rate. And so to Chris's point and as well to Joe Beth's point, 5 acres and really looking at what the numbers are. That's the number one thing is let the numbers drive your decisions. And once you make those decisions, stick to it. Those that change their mind halfway down the road are the ones that struggle and they pay fee after fee. And it delays project, but it also just costs a lot of money.
The one thing we always say is listen to the data, and you got to keep listening to the data.
I'll make
Yeah.
a comment real quick since both the gentlemen have spoke about Loves. Unfortunately, we lost Mr. Love this last December, but that was one of their first projects, and I've done their feasibility studies for their RV and boat, and also they do little baby campgrounds now by their facilities for people that want to just stay overnight somewhere safe and keep driving. So the Loves family is delightful to work with, and it was a good project there in Las Vegas.
Thanks for adding that, Jo Beth. It's good to hear that background. I have a question, Jo Beth, that I am going to pose to you because it's interesting that I get this. I get a lot of folks that don't even know they need a feasibility study until we start talking. And they're asking, does this make sense? And I'm like, that's your feasibility person. So the question, and it might seem simple at first, but it comes up a lot, is when is the best time to get a feasibility study? Now, the assumption would be in the very beginning, right? Make sure that everything that you're looking for overall is making sense. But if they did not do that, say they purchased a piece of land, they've even started or whatnot, can they still bring a feasibility person into the mix?
Yes, we do them at any of the stages. We prefer to come in early because we can kind of predicate what unit mix is applicable to that market and hand that off to the architect and the engineers, and they don't have to do their work twice and then redraw it all. I'm working on one right now in Colorado that's all fully enclosed. And the guy has a nice little site plan, 50-foot units with a 55-foot drive aisle, perpendicular. It's like, oh, baby, that's not going to work. They're not going to be able to get in and out of there. So I've flipped his facility around and put the smaller units back to back and widened those drive aisles. So people don't understand the commodity itself. And if I have someone that comes to me, one of the first questions I ask them is, do you own an RV? Half the time they say no, but I've heard it's great. Go rent one this weekend and drive it around and see if you can park it. And it'll give you an eye-opening idea of what your clients have to deal with. So they can come in at any time, but preferably for me, it's the beginning. So they're not spending architecture and engineering money on perhaps a project that is not feasible because the rates are too low.
And isn't a big part of it also the unit mix? I mean, when you're talking about unit mix, you can do enclosed, you can do canopy, you can also do some traditional storage. So the site design and the unit mix is a big part of it.
Yes,
Do you ever get folks that have already had their design?
Yes.
They're thinking, this is what I want to do. And
yes, and I get to either
give them the okay, and you're like, we need to rethink this.
Right. Yeah. I get to tell them that sometimes, not joyfully, but their mixes are wrong, or they have all 45 and 50 footers and it's a boating market and they have nothing to satisfy the 20 and 25-foot stalls. So sometimes I get to help them redo their mixes. But if they would have done it to begin with, they wouldn't have had all that angst and all that pre-thinking of all this money that they're going to make. And now it's different because the mix is different. So I can be brought in anytime, but I prefer to be brought in at the beginning.
Thank you. And Greg and Chris, I would say that you're probably advocates of bringing feasibility into the mix from the get-go as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. Go ahead, Chris.
Are there ever times where you've thought it, a certain mix or a certain area or a certain project, would pan out a certain way, and when you get the feasibility back, it's a little different? Or is it one of those things with your experience, you kind of have an idea now of where it's going to come back?
Greg and I are masterful wizards. We are never wrong.
I'll take it later, Chris.
the one thing that I would add to that I've seen personally, and then talking with others that are that honestly from TSN shows that we've talked to and had these similar conversations about, is I have an architect that I've used for my office buildings, my hotels or whatever. Now I'm going to get into this. So, I'm just going to use my architect. Well, I've seen it where the drive aisles are horizontal and they should be perpendicular to just maximize efficiency, just to maximize your rentable square footage, like little things that an architect or designer that specializes or has experience in this product type, as I knows, because I think, Greg, you do it in-house, is to get an expert or get someone on board, which could be Jo Beth, but also just the designer, part of your design team that has that knowledge of this. I would say 9 out of 10 people I've talked to, it's that can't say conversation of, oh, I'm just going to use my same architect. And
Right.
I think that's a bad decision.
That's a great point. We do it a little bit differently. We start our feasibility study by analyzing the market and looking at rates.
Mhm.
That helps us decide what unit mix to go with. And we pause our feasibility study to draw our site plan with the architects, draw the unit mix that meets that criteria for the ingress, egress along the road, what retention we need, any easements across the property. Once we have that initial site plan done, then we run our pro forma and start to tweak things until we get the numbers correct.
Mm.
That way I'm not having to start over with the architect or having to restart over the feasibility study. We know going in, before we spend a lot of money with the architectural, we know that the unit mix makes sense and that we're maximizing the amount of square footage that we have on that site. And I'll give you one example. We did a feasibility study on a property in Fernley, Nevada, and I'm very much an advocate of having the address and the site selected so that you're understanding what goes into that site specifically. We did the feasibility study on a project on one side of the road, and the client, without talking to us, bought the property across the street, thinking that all the numbers are going to be the same, the drive-by traffic is all the same. What he didn't understand, and because we have architectural and general contracting in the house, was in the course of the research, we found out that the water line was on the side of the road that we did the feasibility study on. There was no water access on the other side of the road. And in order to get it there, we had to directionally drill underneath the highway an 8-inch water main that cost upwards of $750,000 because he thought, no big deal, I'll buy across the street. There's a lot that goes into these reports that make sure that we're not spending money unwisely, right? We have all the utilities stubbed up on the property, or that we have a left-hand turn lane, or we don't have to put a deceleration lane out in front of the project. All of that goes into the data, and so it's very address-driven, making sure that we're not giving money to the city because they're nice people. Rather, let's put money in areas of the project that make sense and that I can get an ROI on, instead of just the pleasure of doing business. I've got to pay you $1 million, which happens frequently with a lot of municipalities.
Right. So there's a lot of things to consider. One thing, Chris, and thank you, Greg, that you had mentioned that's interesting to me is I do get calls from folks who've done development in other areas. And we're really lucky to have folks such as yourself that specialize in boat and RV storage. That some of them just from the get-go don't understand they're feasibility experts for this particular market, that this is what you do day in and day out. Folks that are doing the site mapping, and it is a different market than others. And to work with the experts that know what works for this particular market is so important, whether you've had experience or you've been doing development in other areas. So very fortunate to have you. We've talked a little bit about Class A and what that is. And this is another open-ended question, but I think because we really advocate for Class A so much, we briefly touched on it. And I think we talked about the benefits of people wanting those types of things of protection, security, and amenities. Anything else that you can add on why, if you're considering doing boat and RV storage, why Class A is so important?
I think that there is just such a high demand for these Class A facilities in most markets. Especially, I believe that before COVID, and then during COVID, the sales of the higher end RVs just boomed. And there's still, from my research and news I get, there still is demand and a wait list for purchasing new RVs. Now, I drive by Camping World in Northern California every once in a while. A year or two ago, the parking lot was empty because there were no rigs. Now I just drove by that last week and the parking lot was full. So I think sales of those have slowed a little bit, but they're still high. So compared to, right? So there's still just this incredible demand to store those somewhere, and those are expensive. That's my baby. And if my only option in most markets is a gravel lot with a chain link fence and maybe a gate, maybe not, to have this Class A covered, safe, secure facility, there's this massive demand for that product in most markets from what I'm seeing.
And Beth, thank you,
Yeah.
by the way, Chris. From the number standpoint, why is Class A so important? You know, if you're looking at rental over time or just profitability, but you know.
Well, from the client's aspect, and that's where I always go to is from the client standpoint, not my client, but the person that's renting, is they have a lot of money tied up in these boats and these rigs, and they need to be better protected. It's always interesting to me when I see these people, you know, you don't self-storage. Let's just compare the two, self-storage to RV and boat. If you have a self-storage unit and you have to get rid of all your stuff because you lost your job, you're going to have a garage sale, you're going to give it to your nieces and nephews. Now, if you have a boat or RV and you lost your job and you have to sell it, chances are whoever you're selling it to is going to have to store it. So the physicalness of the commodity is very different. You don't have a lot of movement of tenants in and out. In fact, sometimes they just don't leave. So you have to make sure that your rental agreements account for a rental increase every year. So it's a very different commodity from what the client's looking at, because they love to come and visit their rig. It's weird. I don't own one in 24 years because it's a conflict of interest. I don't manage nor I build because it's a conflict, but it's interesting to me as I talk to my clients. Steve Strimmel in Reno, he hasn't used any of his advertising money at all for advertising, but he buys popsicles for the little kids because these folks come out and visit the facility to visit their rig. So it's a very different set of human beings that you're renting to.
Thank you, Beth. And Greg, I remember being on another call with you at one point where you talked about folks with the razors, the toys, that they all like to stay at the same place and the guys will get together. And it's really about the community feel of that. And Class A really kind of brings that together, having a nicer facility.
Absolutely. I think the value of building a Class A facility is exactly that. You're selling on a value proposition instead of strictly on a rental rate. I don't want to get in a rental rate race with my competitors. I'd rather sell my units based on the value I'm offering, because if those rates ever start to go down, the first place they're going to move out of is the place that doesn't have the values that justify that rate. So put yourself in the shoes of a new RV owner that just got back from a 5-day trip. The last thing you want to do is drive around 10 o'clock at night trying to find a dump station. The last thing you want to do when you start your trip is driving around trying to find somewhere to fill up with water, somewhere to get ice, and the very worst is some of these amenities like solar that Chris is putting on is trickle chargers. The last thing you want to do is show up excited for your trip and find out that you got to spend $800 on 2 new lithium batteries because they're dead. And so the values enhance the experience of the storage and the ultimate reason for the RV, which is togetherness, which is memory making. So the values allow us to compete on a completely different level, not on price, but on value. And that goes to your property manager and having them understand, yes, we are a little bit more expensive, but we're the only site in the city that has a dump station. We're the only site that has a trickle charger to make sure that your $800 lithium batteries aren't dead when you show up. It enhances the experience to have better values.
Sure. And kind of piggyback on that, these are folks, if they can afford these expensive toys, they can afford to go based on value. It's not a price haggle. Gotcha. I want to take it a step, and Chris, I didn't want to cut you off if you had anything to add.
I'm good.
We're good.
I'm making notes to myself right now.
We're all learning something
We're always learning, right?
from each other. So I wanted to go back quickly here on, I get a lot of questions on financing and any recommendations that you could give. And Beth, I know I keep calling you up, but with regards to, you know, feasibility studies, I know are very important when it comes to kind of the financing process. So would love to hear it from your side. And I know there are only certain feasibility folks that are approved by a lot of the banks to work with. So I wanted to get into a little of that you're working with the right person. But from a feasibility side, but then also, you know, Greg and Chris, if you have anything to add as well, obviously from the site, the plan, the development process, any of that, what recommendations do you give with regards to a feasibility study, you know, as far as the financing part of it?
Well, when
The
you're looking
process,
at
just
financing,
to make it easier.
the biggest question, and it's a very personal question to ask folks, is you have to know their ability to borrow. You know, how much cash do they have liquid? Because I don't want to tell them they can build 780 stalls if they can't afford more than 200 stalls. So they have to know what their own ability is to borrow. So I think it's really important to introduce them to the lenders early on to find out what the lenders think about their credit, what the lenders think about how much money they have in cash to put into the projects. Because, you know, any project you can come up with is a big project, but if they can't afford it, your feasibility study hasn't helped them. So you need to know what they can finance. So I suggest them getting a hold of the lenders early and at least having those initial conversations.
Thank you. Greg, any recommendations that you have as far as, you know, securing financing, easing the process?
Yeah, you know, one of the struggles that a lot of people find is that their pro forma numbers don't match their site plan, right? The revenue that they're expecting doesn't meet the criteria for the bank. And so a lot of times what we're recommending is getting the bank involved early. What we help with is a lot of times the bank and the credit committees are asking, well, what are the operations like of the facility? What's your experience? There are certain operators and feasibility study consultants that are allowed to do reports for the SBA, for example, or credit unions. They want to make sure that you have X amount of years of experience. On the management side, the SBA doesn't allow owner operators unless they have X amount of years of experience doing boat and RV specifically. So putting together your team ahead of time is going to make that financing process a lot easier. And then also making sure that your numbers match. I mean, they have to make sense. And with the increasing construction costs right now, it's not enough to own 5 acres outright. That's not enough in a lot of scenarios. As LTCs or loan to costs go from 90% on an SBA loan down to 65% on a conventional loan, you have to understand the delta between the capital that needs to be brought up in your capital stack. And what does that mean on the equity side? Are you having to give up a lot more in order to bring in an investor, like what Beth said, that's bankable? It's not enough to have the capital. A lot of banks are asking for 2.5 times the borrow amount to approve the loan, not just equity in the deal, but you have to have net worth essentially for them to go after you if you can't make the mortgage payment, right? There's something for them to exercise their risk on, but the picture is growing, it's becoming bigger. And the more that you know going in, the better you can prepare for it and have those answers before the bank asks, because that is what provides the confidence that you're not going in this haphazardly, that you have a plan, that you have the team behind you to make the right decisions, that have really learned the hard way already. And now you get to learn from their experience. So having the team together when going to the credit committees or to your banker is extremely important.
Thank you. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I would add, I'm a big fan of SBA financing for this product type. It's allowed for hotels, self-storage, and RV boat storage. Like Greg was saying, you can get up to like 85-90% loan to cost for these. The biggest hurdle, especially with interest rates how they are today, that I've experienced and am experiencing right now, is just a debt, what they call a debt service coverage ratio, DSCR. And what that is a so for example, that I have to be at a 1.35 debt coverage ratio, which means that my revenue, my expected net operating income, has to be 1.3 times more than the expected debt payment. So essentially the bank's looking at, I've got 35% of profit over what to make their payment. And what I'm experiencing is they're underwriting these projects as and adding maybe 1 percentage point over what the expected interest rate is today to make sure that they're covered if interest rates go up. So for one project that I'm about to start construction on in Napa County in Napa Valley, California, because of that debt coverage, we own the land outright. We have entitlements. So now that land has increased in value. We've spent money. The value is increased on the land. Because of that debt coverage discrepancy, to get my loan, I was going to have to put in $1 million of additional capital, and that would have shrunken my interest or profit in the project. I would have to give up equity to have someone infuse another $1 million into that project, right? So kind of figuring those components out, like Greg and Beth were saying early on, really helps, get the bank on board in that early on process so they can kind of ride that wave with you. So they're fully understanding the whole ins and outs. Now I'm gonna plug solar because we were able to get around this issue of not having to bring $1 million of equity by adding solar to the project. That just shifted how our capital stack was working and able to shift a lot of costs over to the solar. And so we were able to get that to work that way.
And Chris, I hope in the future we'll do another installment of this where we cover solar, because it's such a huge thing.
I could talk about that all day.
We also have your articles. You did 2 articles in the past covering the solar incentives and the benefits there. So,
Okay.
And thank you, by the way. Wanted to, and I know we've got about 10 minutes left here, and I promise I'll move this along. Otherwise, I'll keep guys on all day. And I'm sure you'll have your day jobs to do. With regards to the entitlements process, I know a lot of times projects kind of get stalled once you're dealing with approvals with the city and entitlements. Is there anything that you can recommend with someone with regards to experience you've had or things you see that could kind of help that process along, or things that you tend to find get caught up when it comes to city approval? Who wants to jump in first? Greg, I see you.
I want Greg to go first.
It's an interesting world out there because the cities are getting wise to the fact that these boat and RV storage facilities do not generate a lot of taxable revenue for the cities. And so they're not a huge fan. But my recommendation is that you're doing your own research to understand what the code allows for. Had an experience recently in California where we went into the city, we were looking to buy land, and we said we'd like to do storage, RV storage on the parcel. And they said, you're not allowed to do RV storage. I said, interesting. And so we walked out and we're ready to cancel the contract on the purchase. And it comes to find out you're allowed to do storage. You're not allowed to do RV storage.
Interesting.
And so they really were trying to dissuade us from developing by being a little deceitful. It turns out that we actually went back through and applied for a variance, which they approved, to allow for the boat and RV storage to be developed. So it's interesting when going into these entitlement processes, you have to know your stuff. You can't rely on the city to tell you yes or no, because they have no vested interest in these projects. You've got 2 employees, low taxable revenue compared to a multifamily deal. There's no federal grants that they can get or bonds to help them on their side with your project. And you're taking up a lot of land in their city, which is becoming increasingly more scarce in areas that have the available revenue per capita to buy these vehicles. And so doing your own research, understanding how the property is going to operate after it's built is a lot of the questions I get in these city council and in these planning review committees. Is not about the design, not about the means and methods of what we're building. It's more about what's the traffic count. A lot of times they want to put us in the category of a C-store, which has 400 cars a day. We do not have anywhere near that. And so educating them to that with data, talking about the hours of operation. Is this going to be a area that's going to have people coming and going at all hours of the night? The reality is these vehicles are sitting idle at the property for 360 days a year, right? Our data suggests we get about 4 cars per day visiting. And a lot of those are coming to grab their vehicle out before a trip, and then they don't come back for 2 weeks. So educating the city and having the data ready to combat their, a lot of times, irrational concerns with your project to get it pushed through. You've got to rely on yourself. Do not rely on the city to have your best interests at heart to get your project done.
Thank you. Chris or Joe Beth, anything
I
to
would,
add?
I,
That was a lot. Thank you, Greg.
yeah, that was, I would add, I would reiterate what Greg said for sure. And not only what the city or the county planners or engineers tell you, typically if they say, no, you can't do this, I would say 99 out of 100 times that is not the case. And that goes with your civil engineer, your architect as well. And so I know one project, they told me I have to do a septic. And so I went down that path. We don't have any sewer. There's no sewer. There's no sewer. Took the county health department to come out to inspect where we're going to put our septic in. And they said, we can't approve this because there's a sewer right across the street, literally across the street from my property. The sewer district, which was separate from the city, for literally 12 months told me, nope, that is a force main sewer line. You cannot connect to it. The county guy said, no, it's not. It switches from gravity to a force main, literally halfway. If this is my property, it's gravity to here and then force to there. So they're like, you have to connect here. The sewer district did not know that. I mean, it's like,
Not surprising.
it was mind blowing. So instead of having this whole, and I'm like, I've spent thousands of dollars with my engineer and the septic guy that I just pissed away because the sewer district did not even know what was going on across. And it wasn't out of laziness of my part. I tried. I was like, my plans show a sewer. Nope, that's a force main. No, you can't.
And all the loss of rentable square footage for your leach fields and your tanks.
100%. Yep.
So, yeah.
So that's just one of, probably Greg and I could spend 4 hours here talking about.
Oh, don't worry. We're going to do a future installment on entitlements, and that one is probably going to be a 2 hour.
The other thing that I'll just add, yeah, no, really, look at the gray hairs from it. The only other thing that I've experienced, Greg, you probably have, Joe Beth, this might be out of yours, but is when they go to calculate the fees, the impact fees, the traffic fees, all those fees. On one project, I've been 3 years so far fighting because they charged me as if I was a 250,000 square foot industrial building. They said, all we have is residential, commercial, and industrial. So you're industrial. And I went down and looked up their code, how they got into what that fee was. Essentially, they're calling me a 250,000 Amazon warehouse with 80 employees. So that's 80 something cars coming in and out. That's impacting 80 people now in the community for police, for parks, for you name it. And I am so I paid it because I had to pay it out of protest. And it's been 3 years and I'm still fighting it because they said, nope, this is how you have to do it. That's not the case. There's consultants, there's people that do have expertise in that.
Right.
And that is one that I would vet out sooner than later because those fees, depending on where you're at, can be very high.
Chris,
traffic fees.
And Greg, and Joe Beth, when you agree, this is another reason it goes back to working with folks who specialize in boat and RV storage, and that, you've been there, you've dealt with these issues that a lot might not even think of if they haven't come across them before.
Yes.
Yeah, and when you talk about entitlements, many times people don't even understand what ordinances are and what they mean. So especially when we're doing a reverse study, we're going to find those parcels that it's permittable use. So you don't have to get a CUP or an SUP. It's a permitted by right. So teaching your clients what's permitted by right and what a CUP or SUP means is really helpful. And I always tell clients, if you've had another facility that's been built in your area, go down and pull their planning file. It's public record. Look at it and see what hoops the city made them jump through to get approved. And make sure that you've accounted for that in your own design so you don't have to jump through those same hoops. And it's important to know what that entitlement process is. Most cities or county agencies will do a pre-application as well. And they'll run your project up the flagpole to the fire department, to civil, all these different departments to get their thoughts. And those don't cost a lot for a pre-app.
Mhm.
And that's helpful for people to know as well.
Thank you, Jo Beth. In hearing you talk on this, I think one thing that's important to note that I've noticed within this industry, although we talk about you being a feasibility person or, someone being a developer or whatnot, you all are experts across the field, are understand the entire process. You guys know this industry and how projects start, how they finish, and what's in between. It's not, for some of the companies that come to our workshop, they may supply a certain particular service, but they really educated themselves on the entire market and the entire process. Would you agree? In a lot of ways, it's really understanding the whole process all the
Yes.
way.
Well, that just, Amy, what I've talked to several people at the shows, the TSN shows, is that when you go there, you have the three of us that are here that are experts in this, but everyone that's there with Baja, Mako, Devin on the brokerage side, these are all experts in this industry that are there to provide value to make your project successful.
Right.
And these are the companies, like I'll use Baja and Mako. They're the ones that are going to go build it for you, or who I would suggest building it. So that's why I think those shows are so great for people to go to, because you're in the deep end with all of these people at one place. So you can ask Jo Beth questions, ask Greg, hey, I'm looking at this site. Yeah, let's talk about it. Talk to Devin and say, yeah, I think that market's saturated, right? Devin does a quick feasibility study, market study for any, I've seen 2 or 3 he's done for friends of mine. So I think it's
Good
such a
point.
great value
Good point.
there too.
To save some time here, because I'm cognizant I'm using a little more time than I said I would. And for those folks that are listening, I promise this is not going to go on for another 3 hours. I've kind of got to pick my last question, then I'm going to piggyback something onto that. So ancillary revenue, we've talked about the site and maximizing, your profitability by finding the correct site selection, unit mix and whatnot. But ancillary revenue, there's a lot of opportunity there. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are, what you often suggest for a site. And then on top of that, what's your number one piece of advice that you would give someone who's considering developing boat and RV storage? Or, maybe you wish somebody had told you in the past. So kind of open 2 questions at once just to get it moving here. And then after that, what I want to do is go each one of you and have you give your contact information, because you are sharing great information. I'm sure folks that are listening are going to want to be able to contact with you and have questions or potentially work with you. So let's see, Jo Beth. So
Okay.
ancillary revenue, and then your biggest piece of advice that you get.
Ancillary revenue, you don't actually have a tremendous amount of ancillary revenue. It's more service things that you're putting in to draw the clients in. You may have propane and you've got some propane sales. You may have ice and you have ice sales. But all of those are really there as a service to the client. As Greg said, there's nothing worse than having to drive your 45-foot diesel pusher to go find ice. You know how hard that is to park at 7-Eleven to get ice? So they're not as much money driven as they are service, as far as my aspect is concerned. It's not that much income, but it's a lot when it comes to service for the clients.
Go ahead, Chris. I see the wheels turning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of the site that we're leasing up right now in Rio Vista. I was out there yesterday, and we bought a bunch of wheel stops and kind of things we thought our customers might want, and they really thinking it would be additional revenue, and it's really not. I think we're even pricing it just at what we bought it for. I think at this point, just we're not looking to make a huge profit on it. And then I was kind of making weird face movements because I was doing the math in my head. I had this conversation with insurance, which I think is an added source of revenue. Tenant insurance for their RVs on top of and separate from just their normal insurance. And in going through the conversation with this one insurance group, it was like, you get 40% of the revenue. Well, that's $10 a month times 40. So $4 in additional revenue. And if I have 500 units, let's say 300 of them do it, it was like $1,200 a month in additional revenue. And I didn't want to be disrespectful, to the sales person, but I'm just like, is that worth it for the amount of work that my manager is going to have to do to deal with that? Or, when there's claims and then I'm brought in, like, I've yet to see these additional sources of revenue ancillary like you would get in self-storage.
Right.
I know even on self-storage that, Greg, I don't know if you guys do this, but you'll charge like a $5 or $10 a month tech fee if I use the Noki lock. And in self-storage, people will do that. They'll pay for that. The customers will. I'm kind of with Joe Beth that I think those additional sources of revenue are really kind of more loss leaders as a service and a value to your site.
Well, you can do things like, the little things that hold the drawer in, the little plastic guy, so if it's broken, the drawer flies out every time you go around the corner.
Right.
I mean, you can have some of that kind of stuff in your office, but you can also provide them that RV wish book of all the service and supplies and things that they can buy for their RV, and get it stamped on the back with your facility and get it ancillary income that way when they order from these companies. But you're not having to stock those little tiny things that hold the cabinet door in.
Yeah.
It really goes back to value proposition. What do I want to sell and generate revenue? And what do I want to offer to create a better value proposition for my tenants to justify my rates, whether they be at market or above market? The one thing that we have found that does supersede the headache factor of the little trinkets is we looked at doing trickle charges for a long time, and the cost of running an outlet to each unit when it comes to wire and conduit and labor costs, and then the added utility expense month over month. We've gone and developed a solar trickle charger, and we put in all the infrastructure, which is a 1 foot by 2 foot solar panel above each unit. And then we sell them access to that solar panel in the form of a trickle charger. So we're removing the install cost of the electrical infrastructure on the property. We're removing the utility cost of the ongoing utility usage. But then we're also removing the ability for these individuals for plugging in their RVs to run their air conditioning units. So for example, in Florida, on the enclosed units we have, people run their AC in order to remove humidity from inside their RVs so that cabinets don't swell. In Arizona, people put buckets of water inside their RVs to keep humidity in the air so that things don't splinter and dry rot. So we sell these trickle chargers, and that drives revenue, but it also offsets any potential expense from the utility side. That is one of the few that we do sell and generate revenue from, which works well, but then also the tenants have access to power because we don't put outlets in our units. But ultimately, we do sell a few things like flags for boats, ropes, little things that don't drive revenue. But for heaven's sakes, when they're going to the lake and they don't have an orange flag, a safety flag, and you have one in the office, you better believe that's what they're going to leave the review on. Is I was able to get my orange flag, or we sell passes to the lake here in the office. Inevitably, they're going to forget. They're not going to want to stop at Walmart or Sportsman's Warehouse to pick up the pass. We sell it here in our office. And again, it's all convenience that goes towards value, which helps justify our rental rates. That's how I look at it.
Got it. Well, thank all of you. And I know we touched on many points today, but I think this is a good, starter for folks who, like I said, I get that question a lot. I'm sold on the market. I want to get in. Where do I get going on this? So thank you for your time and your expertise. I wanted to just quickly go around, have all of you, for folks who are getting to this video not from our website, which is toystoragenation.com. They may have found this directly on YouTube. I want to make sure that they know how to contact you. So Joe Beth, can you give your company name again, and then how they can reach you?
Yeah, the company name is Development Services, Inc. Our website is storagefeasibility.com. My phone number is 949-433-3395. I take calls till about 8 o'clock at night and always have a tendency to work on the weekend. So I normally will take calls. So just reach out and see if we can give you a hand. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, JoBeth. Chris?
Sure. So my website is kingslandco.net, KINGS landco.net. My office number is 925-314-3849. And unfortunately, like JoBeth, I work many hours, mornings at 5 in the morning to 9 at night and most weekends. And I'm happy to share any information that I have about developing these Class A RV boat storage facilities. Thank you for having us.
Greg?
Again, my name is Greg Ellsworth with Self Storage Consulting Group. Our website is sscg1.com, Self Storage Consulting Group, 1.com. And our phone number is 480-378-3838. We're happy to help with whatever you need or give you a recommendation into another professional that can help in an area that we're unfamiliar with or feel that somebody else can help you better. But thank you, Amy, for putting this together. It's always great to get together as TSN board members and talk about this great industry.
Thank you all. And for those of you listening, I hope that this gives you a good starter. If you're getting to this not from our website, again, our website is toystoragenation.com. We're a media education brand that advocates for Class A boat and RV storage. We, on our website, toystoragenation.com, have new content going up every day, articles, reports, you name it. We also put on full day workshops where we have experts such as the ones that you're seeing today, that go in depth on all the areas needed for boat and RV storage, development, ownership, investment. We also do a facility tour as well. So lots of stuff going on. If you go to toystoragenation.com, you'll find all the information you need. If you do need to reach me, my email address is amyamy.bix@toystoragenation.com. So thank you all for listening, and thank you three for joining us, and again for your time. I know you guys are very, very busy, so appreciate it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.